Jeffie. Welcome to SHOWstudio.
It's lovely to be here.
You have an incredible story to tell us about, which is currently on show in an incredible exhibition, because your mother had a very, very special relationship with Coco Chanel. I want you to start by telling me how they met, because...
Well, they almost didn't meet, because my mother had a friend, and Coco Chanel had a friend. His name was Freddie Brisson, and he was producing a musical for Broadway called Coco. It was a flop, but it had great potential at that time. And he was in Paris in 1967, my mother was also, and he said to Coco Chanel that he knew this American artist that he thought it would be nice for her to meet. And she sort of thought, oh, please, an American artist? I don't think so. I don't think so. He mentioned to my mother was very busy painting some fascinating ladies who were also in their late 80s or 90s, who descended from all the Impressionist painters, Julie Manet-Ruar and Madame Paul Valéry. And Mother's view of meeting Chanel was maybe next year. Finally, Freddie was very, very frustrated, and he said to my mother, Marion, tomorrow, 3 o'clock, I want you to go over to the Rue Cambon. You don't ever have to go back there again, but just for me, because I set it up, would you please go there? So my mother walked over. She was copying at the Louvre. She was trying to learn how Rembrandt painted a portrait. And she was in her old painting slacks and her jacket. She always had a sketch pad with her. So she walked over to the Rue Cambon and she went up to the floor, the second floor, up that famous winding stairway. And Coco was doing a fitting and all the seamstresses were around and the model was standing there. She didn't come over and greet my mother. She did nothing. She paid no attention to her whatsoever. And Mother leaned against a door jamb for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. There was a lawyer waiting to see Chanel. He looked like he was going to die of cardiac arrest. He was so upset because she paid no attention to anybody. After about an hour, hour and a half, she stopped. She walked across the room to my mother. She took the sketch pad out of her hand. She flipped through it. She looked at my mother and she said, here, she had a scarf around her neck. She took it off. She put it around my mother's neck. She said, this is a souvenir of our first meeting. You have the hand of a vrai artiste, of a real artist. Could you come to lunch tomorrow? I know we're going to become great friends. Within 3 days after that meeting, she invited my mother to set up her easels on site in the atelier, right where she was doing the fittings and designing, and paint. And my mother went there. She said, you come whenever you want to. And my mother spent 2 years going day in, day out. And everybody there said that when Mother was there, everyone was happier. There was a rejuvenating experience that no one can explain. For Chanel, she said she couldn't have done her 1968 collection without my mother. Mother was a catalyst to her. My mother said when she first met Chanel, she thought she was the ugliest woman she'd ever seen. And then she said she began to see many facets to her personality. And my mother had all kinds of offers to paint people. And my mother's one criterion is that face or is that landscape or is that flower bouquet paintable? If it was not paintable, she wouldn't do it. And she found something fascinating in Chanel. And the friendship, who knows? I don't know how many people could be invited here into this atelier space upon a first meeting, just come and work here. That's what happened.
I'm interested in that friendship because it is such an incredible story, and there's so many similarities it feels between the life of your mother and the life of Chanel and some of their interests. And why do you think they did develop such a close bond?
We're never going to know, but we do know this. We know that they were great equestrian. My mother was a champion. She rode 5-gaited horses growing up in San Francisco, in Golden Gate Park. We know that Coco was brilliant on horseback. They both were, my mother was a champion golfer. They both said they felt the urge to create in their hands. When my mother had the urge to paint, it wasn't an intellectual, today I will do, I will paint the void and contemplate the void. It was an itch in her hands to paint something she saw in front of her. Coco had the same urge to create in her hands, Both of them late in life got arthritis in their hands. And it took a lot to have, listen, when my mother met Coco, my mother was 53 and she was 83. They were both lions. August 14th, my mother would have been 100 years old this summer, Coco 130. I felt when I was with them and we were all together at a dinner table that there was some kind of mother-daughter. If Coco could have designed a daughter, it might have been my mother, because my mother was independent, professional, focused, and Coco was focused. And there was something in, they both had a horror of what they called an amateur. They both felt they were always learning, always trying to do something a little better tomorrow. And I think that made for an amazing, some kind of friendship. Also, I found interesting, my mother grew up in a house in San Francisco. My grandmother Rose, my mother's mother, went on her honeymoon to Paris. She saw the Petit Trianon. She said to her husband, "I'd really like one of those." And they went home to San Francisco and built this house that's really virtually a copy. Coco Chanel could have decorated it, from the floors to the French antiques to the Asian influence. And I felt, my mother never liked that. Mother wanted something very different. Frank Lloyd Wright designed a house for her. But I think when she went into that very opulent third floor above the atelier, the old boutique, the ground floor was handbags, scarves, bijoux, faux bijoux, went up the staircase where the runway models, but that was the atelier where they worked. The top floor, my grandmother could have decorated, and I think when my mother got there, it was, oh, I've gone to Mum's to dinner. It was so familiar. And they both had tragedy. They both had people very close to them who in their 40s committed suicide. Coco's sister, my mother's mother. And you know, there's a shorthand when you meet someone who's on the same wavelength. I imagine if they watched the horse races, they'd say, there, right. They didn't need to make an essay. Do you know what I'm saying? They knew, they both were passionate about opera. They knew every tone, every note, who could sing, who couldn't, who was a musician. They loved artists. Both of them loved artists. Who knows what it really is?
But one thing that's so interesting about their friendship is it almost became a creative relationship as well. You know,
that's what it was.
And you see that between the paintings and the clothing.
Oh, that's what it was. That's what it was.
Who was inspiring who, or were they both inspiring each other?
We're never going to know. Obviously, it was a transaction. I think if a photographer takes a picture, if an artist goes to paint a portrait, there's a transaction. One relaxes the other, one brings out something in the other, and Coco sat for some of the portraits, worked, Mother painted all the time. It was an ongoing thing. It's really hard to put into words, but something worked. They went to Switzerland. Mother painted flowers on the house, in the walls in the house there, and then she painted many, many scenes of the Swiss mountains, and everywhere they went, both of them were working, either with their hands or in their heads, or they were looking. If they heard some music, they would say, something was in sync for these two women who were 30 years apart in age. And I think my mother's independence was, you know, she met Coco, but then she still had a trip to Asia. She went to Asia. I found this telegram which said, "Come back fast, come back as quickly as you can. I'm bored without you, love." And then very funny, almost like a child writing home from camp, "Love, Coco Chanel," like Mother would have not known which Coco it was. But Mother led her life, was there when she was there, and they had a bond that, well, I don't know, maybe you'd like to know how I got into the act, because
this was my next question.
Well, when my mother wanted me to come and see these paintings that she'd been telling me about, and I arrived in Paris in the fall of 1968. I had had my first child in the previous March, and he was 6 months old, Jono, and I mention that because it played into the story. But I got dressed to go over to meet Chanel, and I had on a dress that was a copy of a copy of a copy off probably the sale rack in New York, sleeveless, A-line, above the knee. That is what anybody my age wore in 1968. My mother took one look at me because Coco Chanel had a horror of the miniskirt. And this was not a little mini, this was just above the knee. She said, well, I can't take you to meet her in that. What else do you have to wear? I said, that's it. It's the only dress I brought. She said, we'll just have to go. So we went. And of course, if you've just been told you look dreadful and the person you're meeting has a horror of what you're wearing.
And it's Coco Chanel.
And it's Coco Chanel, you don't feel really confident. And we went in, I'll never forget, we went up, and we came into the salon, and Coco was way out on the edge of this sort of suede sofa. She was reading her horoscope. She had a Coca-Cola bottle on the table, the lacquer table in front of her. She patted the sofa for my mother to sit down. She motioned me across the room. There was a very straight back chair, like a little, maybe one of the ones you sat on. And I sat down in it, and I just kept trying. I thought if I sink down a little, I can pull my skirt to get it closer to my knees. No one spoke to me. She talked to my mother like this. She put her hand like this, and they just talked. And I thought, well, I'm never going to be in this room again. I might as well look around. And I sat there. Finally, we got up, and I thought, oh, it's over. It's over. Thank goodness it's over. Nope, we were going downstairs. We went across the street, the Rue Cambon. You could go in the Ritz Hotel, the back entrance. That entrance has been boarded up. I think the last people to go out that entrance were Dodi Fayed and Princess Diana. You can't go in there anymore, it's closed. We went in, we sat down for dinner at a small table and proceeded, Coco talked to my mother like this, and I sat there and I tried to be polite and I just thought, this will be over. We got home. Mother called to say, bonne nuit, chérie. Well, she said, I observed your daughter closely for the whole time we were together. She said, between most mothers and daughters, there's a bit of tension. Sometimes there's rivalry, there's jealousy. Not between the two of you. She said, no, she said, I liked your daughter very much because, Marion, she looked at you with such kind eyes. Kind eyes. Could you bring her to lunch tomorrow? And that was the beginning of her embracing me in the most magical, she was the funniest, sweetest, warmest, storytelling. But she didn't look at my dress. She looked right through me. And she looked right through everybody. You could do a double take of her sitting on that couch and see a gypsy, a seer, who was going to look right through you and get your number. After she decided she liked me and embraced me, she never stopped fussing. She'd pull on the shoulder, this. And I said, I know. I said, but it's just off the rack in New York. Ça se voit. You can tell that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she clapped her hands. And anyway, she dressed me. She gave me some beautiful clothes. And she just made me feel she was a fairy godmother. It was an amazing experience, and it was so unexpected. So that story could go on for 3 hours, but I think
I'd like to ask a bit more about your relationship with her, because this incredible archive that you've built of correspondence, like that wonderful telegram that you mentioned, and the paintings obviously themselves, but there are these clothes. And just tell me a bit about some of the things that you have that celebrate your mother's friendship with Chanel, but also your friendship with Chanel.
Well, I went to the runway show, the fall of '68, and there was one suit that I thought really was wonderful. And I thought, I had a savings account that would just about cover the cost of the suit. Yeah. And I thought, should I buy that? I'd never spent, one didn't spend that on clothes. It was just, and I thought, well, it'd be a souvenir of being here and on and on and on. Yes, I think I'll buy that suit. So I tried it on in the dressing room. They bring in a model. And I just took my breath away. I also thought, where will I ever wear this? But then I thought, I really have to have it. Yes, I'll order it. So I felt very grown up. I was 28, but I think I still felt very, very young And the vendeuse came back, the sales lady, and she said, plus de tissu. There was no more fabric. She was very sorry they couldn't make it for me. And I felt wonderful. I had stepped up to say, this is what I would really like to have, but then I didn't have to buy it. But I still wanted it, but it wasn't available. And we went over just about daily, and the next day or 2 days, I don't know, a little bit later, we were upstairs together in the sitting room, and she was still pulling at my, dress. And finally she gave this dramatic sigh that like there's no hope for that dress. Because I took one dress for this trip. It didn't occur to me I'd ever see her again.
Yeah.
And she gave a clap of her hands, and in came Millie and the seamstresses and everybody, and they brought in this suit that the one I had wanted. And she said, yes. She said, this is the suit that I chose for myself out of this year's collection. Very good taste, my dear, was the idea. I would go behind the Coromandel screen and try it on. So I went behind this lacquered screen, and I put it on, and it just fit me perfectly. I was very skinny. And I came out, and she said, well, she said, look, she said, I have the figure of a 28-year-old girl. She said, that's my suit out of my closet that I just had made for myself, and it's yours. And she then began looking. I needed a necklace, and was a long to-do to find nothing long. Finally, she found the necklace and the scarf and then the belt and the blouse. And then I was barefoot, and she kicked off her shoes, said, try them on. And of course, they were very wide. Oh, she said, that's right. She said, when you get to my age, your ankles and feet are all swollen up. It's just awful. So she said, you've got to go get yourself some shoes. Well, you can believe I did.
Yeah.
And she said, now, she said, when you take this suit and you wear this suit, she said, you have to remember, she said, you're not a young girl, a jeune fille right out of high school. You're a grown woman now. You're a mother. You have a baby. She had looked through the baby pictures of my son, John, and she looked at them. She said, what a child. She said, he has eyes which shine like he has a little touch of genius. She said, I stopped my vie privée, my private life, far too soon. I should have had a child, but this is the child I would have liked to have. And she put this in her purse. She showed it to everybody. She was kissing it, my baby, mon baby, mon bébé. And she said, so you take this suit and go home. And she said, you remember, now you're a grown woman. You're the mother of a child. And she said, you try to make something of your life. It wasn't become a fashionista and buy a lot more clothes. It was a huge validation for me. Mm-hmm. That story goes on for 3 more hours too.
I've got so many questions because it's such an amazing story. But one thing that I find so incredible when you tell me all of this and about your mother's amazing friendship with Chanel is it's not written about at all.
No.
And there's obviously so much documentation of Chanel's life, whether it's fashion books, biographies, films, but nothing. Do you know why that is? Or?
No, you'd have to ask the people who wrote the books. But I must say, this part I can say. When I read in 2011, when Amy wrote her book,
that was the first mention, wasn't it?
There were a couple of other books, and one of them written, maybe I don't want to get into that kind of. One of them said it was of a relative of Chanel's who was very close to her and whatever, that at the end of Chanel's life, namely the last 5 years, during which time my mother knew her so well, all of the artists that Coco had admired had died. And there was no artist around that she admired or liked at all, only this one niece. Now in Mother's date books, I see dates where Mother knew that niece. Why did the niece want to say that? We're never going to know. You'd have to ask her. But very often if you interview children in a family, they'll say, I was the only one they loved. They didn't like any of my brothers or sisters. I don't know. But in fact, that's just historically not true. However you want to look at it, my mother and Chanel were friends. You might not like it. You might not have liked my mother. You might, I don't know. Another woman wrote a book who had befriended her and was a therapist. And the minute Chanel died, she wrote a book about her. Just what we all want as a therapist to, when we die, write about. She said she was the only one who was there for Coco at the end of her life. In fact, and my mother was one of these people who didn't want that kind of exclusivity. She was thrilled if you had lots of friends because she had lots of things to do and places to go and places to travel and many other. For one reason or another, my mother also knew that woman because we see in the date books dinner with this and that. Why they felt that they wanted to write books saying, had it not been for me, this poor alienated, angry, dried up, sad, toxic old woman would have perished, I will never know. But it just isn't true. And what impressed me with Amy, shall I tell you about Amy and me?
Yeah, I want to know.
Because
You said it was almost similar to how your mother met
Lord, we have a wonderful bookstore in La Jolla that has always in their window these beautiful art books that come out. And I looked in the index always to see did anyone mention my mother, because you wonder I'm not in the book publishing business, and I'm not out to And here was this book by Amy de la Haye, and my mother was in the index, and I thought, oh my goodness. And there was one sentence, because she had seen David Bailey's photographs,
which was in vogue, yeah.
Which Coco Chanel liked well enough to say, I want my models photographed in front of these paintings, which would suggest she liked the paintings. Whether you think she didn't like any of the artists, she invited one to paint in her atelier and then show her, and my husband said to me, you've got to call her. And I said, why? She's written her book. I'm not going to bother her. I have nothing to say to her. I'm sorry. What am I going to do? Call her up and say, isn't it too bad you didn't write more about my mother?
But you did call her, didn't you?
No, it took me 6 weeks. My husband and I got up every morning. He'd gotten her email, gotten a phone number. And I said, I'm having my coffee now. And the answer is no. I'm not going to bother that woman. I'm never going to call her. He's implacable. He's extremely, extremely persistent. One afternoon at 4 o'clock, I wrote her, and he said, you don't ask if, you ask what time would be convenient. And so I did that. Here's the time here, here's the time there, like she wouldn't know. What time would you be available? Amy got this email and said, that's a pushy woman. That's an entitled pushy woman. What do you mean? She said, but I'm a very polite person, and because you didn't say, would I like to talk to you? And the answer is no, I'm busy. But when can we speak? I thought, all right. And so she gave me her home number. She said she still doesn't know why she did that. And she has an office at home, and she told her husband and son, just be a minute, I'm going to get rid of the, I'll take care of it. Just be a minute. And we spoke briefly on the phone. I, as you can see, have no problem talking, but when I got on the phone with Amy, I said, I just called to say I really liked your book. And I went blank. I mean brain dead, like you are in an exam. And Amy started talking, because she's quite a talker, and she said, I replied, and I finally said, well, if you really are interested, I could send you a few photos of us together, mother and together with Coco, me, and the suit she gave me and some of the paintings. Oh yes, she said, that'd be lovely. So we hung up. She took them to Francis Corner. Within a matter of weeks, Amy was on a plane coming to California. And before we met, the paintings were in a place in Pasadena, California, and my husband booked us rooms at a big hotel there. And he said to me, have you thought, what are you going to do with this woman for 5 days, this woman you've never seen before? And Amy's mother told me that she was in a panic. She said, what am I going to do for 5 days with someone I've never met before? And it's so interesting, because there's a kind of bridge you cross over. We were out, there's a lovely swimming pool, and I could see Amy, I'd gotten there first, pulling her pulling suitcase, across the bridge. I swear to you, she's the same height, the same build as my mother. I almost thought it was my mother crossing that bridge. And she came around the corner and came in, and we looked at one another, and we both burst out laughing, because immediately we said, this is going to be okay.
And you've both been so nervous.
We were wrecks, and then we spent 5 days going through. I brought banker's boxes that were almost piled to the ceiling of the room, and clothes. She's edited this down to very little. The bellboy who took the stuff up said, will you be staying a while with us? Because it really looked like I'd moved in for several years with boxes. But we sat on the floor, we got a bottle of wine, she had a little camera, and we talked, and she photographed, and she came back again a year later. And meanwhile, I had unearthed many more things. And so my job in this was to sit going through dusty boxes, through papers, and there was a box that was full of papers of Mother's trip to China when she was 18 years old, and went by herself all over Asia, Japan, China, Korea. And I thought, I just can't look through another one of these, or her diary. And I pulled apart 2 onion skin papers, and there was this telegram that Coco Chanel sent Mother. And I thought, all right, I better just get down here day after day after day. I went through papers. And Amy edited, and we worked together writing the book, and here we are. But we almost didn't meet because I can be very amenable, but I was really not going to bother her. I just thought, and she thought also that there was nothing more she could learn about Coco Chanel.
Yeah.
And she said she'd done it, and I knew she'd done it, and I won't call you up and whine. So it was Freddie Brisson who got my mother and Coco together, just not giving up, and my husband, who finally I thought I better do this because I'm tired of these breakfasts.
You just wanted him to be quiet.
No, he's very quiet. You could just tell he was waiting to hear that I'd
you'd
finally gotten in touch with her.
I'm interested in why you'd never approached anyone with the archive, because it seems from what you're saying about trawling through these diaries and boxes, perhaps
I hadn't gone through them.
Yeah, you didn't know.
I had the paintings and I had the clothes, and to tell you the truth, I'm not an art dealer. Everyone has seen Chanel clothes of this period. She's been so much promoted everywhere. Why would anybody care about the few clothes I had that I hadn't actually given to friends? Because I had my mother very often, she had quite a few clothes, and she would ask me if I wanted them, and I'd say no, give them to my aunt, her sister, her younger sister, who was very elegant and always went out in San Francisco. And I said, just give them to Aunt Kiki because she'll wear them every day and I won't. And I have the one Coco gave me. I said to Amy, it's kind of like an engagement ring. You don't need 7. You want 1. And that was very special. And I didn't care about amassing a lot of stuff. And so I had some clothes, but lots of people had those clothes. I didn't know what to do about the paintings. I mean, what would you do? You go see the show and you tell me, what would you do? I also think that being the daughter of the artist, it's hard to be an advocate. Why don't you like my mother's, or do you, or what do you want to, and I didn't, when I met Amy, and Amy was very interesting because as a curator, not only was she looking, I think, for something that hadn't been done and done and done again, but she said all these other books had no documentation. People wrote about themselves and Chanel whatever they wanted. I can't answer all the questions about Mummy and Coco Chanel. I wasn't there. But I do know what Mother told me and what is documented. And so for Amy, it was very important to document a story that's a wonderful story. It's a positive story of people bringing out each the best in the other as professional working artists. You hear about that all the time with musicians. They get together and something works, and then one member doesn't fit and leaves. But when they're together, no one says, why are you together? They're together because there's a synergy, there's a something. That happened between Mother and Coco Chanel, 2 women 30 years apart. We'll never know, but it's documented. And so for Amy, it was important that it wasn't me making up some story or embellishing it. I care neither to make less of it nor more of it. It's just what is. And the other books are just what they are, but as Amy said, no one's ever documented anything in this way. And Coco gave interviews about my mother and about, there was a lot of laughter, which I think is always good for the creative process. And a lot of agreement on fundamental things, whether it was music or, I don't know. I can't make up stories that I don't know. What I know is that it meant something to my mother when Coco died. I felt that something had gone out of Paris for her. It was really like her mother dying again. It was something really profound. With your parents, you don't need to spend every day with them. You have something that's a real bond, and you see them when you're there, and you go off and you do this and come back, but it was a real whole. And I felt sitting at that dinner table with Coco and watching the whole thing, it was like a family dinner, not one of the bad ones where no one gets along, but the best kind. And I think if you look at the pictures of the 2 of them together, you see it. Doesn't need a caption.
So what's it been like to see the whole exhibition come together?
Really just joy, absolute joy. The space is intimate. You can get up close to the paintings. You see the brush strokes. You feel some vibration being in the room. They're not all portraits of Coco Chanel. They're also cityscapes and flowers. Again, Mother painted the most incredible, I say flower paintings. I shouldn't say incredible. You go look at them. But she loved white camellias and grew them in her garden, in the front garden, and painted them over. And it was Coco Chanel's favorite flower. Who's to know why that is? It just was. Mother didn't paint them because Coco liked them. She painted them because she liked them and always had. And so it's an interesting thing. There are also two portraits of two other women who come into the story, Freddie Bresson's wife, Roz Russell, and Louise de Villemorin, which is a side story, but in a way, it's a little bit interesting. Shall I tell you? You can always just get rid of it. Coco and Louise, do you know who Louise de Villemorin was?
Yeah.
She lived at the end of her life with Malraux, with André Malraux. And she was a writer, and and she lived out at this beautiful chateau, Verrières-le-Buisson. Mother had known her since, I guess, early 60s. Coco and Louise had known one another since the 20s or before. And Louise, being a writer, wanted to write a book about her, but Coco changed her story. Every time she wrote something, she changed it. And they had many reasons to fall out. They had a great two sort of grand dame love-hate relationship. Mother loved going to Louise's to Sunday supper with Malraux. She loved going out there to paint. Louise said, well, I'll give you a studio out here. No, Mother never wanted that. She would paint on site at the Rue Cambon. That was a place of business, and then leave. But she wasn't going to, she was very independent. Coco knew that Mother was a great friend of Louise. Louise knew Mother was a great friend of Coco, and each in some interesting way permitted it. They never brought up. But when I went to Sunday supper at Louise's, sporting my beautiful new Chanel suit, I walked in. I had never met Louise before. And Louise said to my mother, is that one of her suits? And Mother said, yes, it was a gift. She looked at me across the room. She said, well, from time to time, she, meaning Coco, does choose a nice fabric.
So you think that...
But I'm saying that what's interesting is my mother's independence, her friendship with both women, who were not crazy about each other, but also knew that there would be nothing either one of them could do to prevent my mother from doing just what she wanted to do. Yes. And I think they both liked that, because I think a great many people who met them, it's a terrible word to say groveling, but Mother was who she was. And you were either paintable or you weren't, or she felt a bond or she didn't, and then she was going to go over here and over there. And if you didn't like it, well, that was okay, but that was your problem, not hers. So that tells you something about a relationship that's where one is a catalyst for the other, but there isn't this ooey gooey, I don't have the words. Do you know what I'm trying to say? There isn't something where now you belong to me. Don't talk to any of my friends or my enemies. So it's interesting. There was, you know what it is? There was huge respect, huge respect, and a kind of distance that comes when you have a great artist. You can be a friend, but you don't. And there's a circle around that person, of which you're respectful.
And you think they would be pleased to see their friendship documented?
Oh, I think they would be
with humor
thrilled.
as well.
Oh, yes. I mean, Coco got up and painted on the paintings when Mother went home. She said those cuffs looked dirty, and she painted them white. And Mother would come back and say, Coco, you got up there. No, she said, you don't create white in a painting by mixing white. You have mixed colors there. That's not how, because Mother had studied for years. She was fascinated with how Monet painted snow. Well, it's all different shades of gray, and then they mix in the mind's eye. And Coco would get back after Mother fixed it. She'd say, well, it does look white, but when you get it, it's not. And my cuffs have to be white. It was playing. And she even said when I was there, she said, your mother's such a great artist, she doesn't mind if I get up there and fix a few things. But what it made Coco, I think it was rejuvenating for her. Because it wasn't someone kind of saying, oh, Coco, I'm here for you if you need anything. Mother was there, but not in that cloying, let's get close way. It was two artists with an incredible amount of respect, but each was a catalyst for the other. I've used that word too many times. You come up with a word.
Oh God, such a pressure.
No, but when one person brings out the best in another, it's what you look for, I think, in a friendship.
Jeffie, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.